Well, here we are, Be a Refuge, episode 2. We're going to be talking about the refuge story today. And there's, I'm sure, tidbits and details and whole chunks that we're not going to get to because we only have 30 minutes. It'd be like, how old is the refuge, Kathy? We're
16 and a half.
16 and a half. So it'd be like, hey, tell me about your 16 and a half year old in 30 minutes and all of the wonderful, intricate details of their life. Not going to happen, but highlights and how they got to be who they are today. We can tell tidbits. So we'll start at the beginning. I am curious, like, what was the dream from the beginning of the refuge? I know it was kind of birthed out of some pain and mess, and love to hear a bit about that.
Yeah, so just in its simplest form, I mean, I worked at a big church, and it was a mega church that had grown a lot and had a lot of growing pains, had a significant pastor transition, founding pastor transition. I worked in recovery there. I was the associate care pastor for a year, and then I was the adult ministry pastor. The church was about 4,000 people. And then in the last 6 months that I was there, a friend, someone I didn't know, became a really good friend, came on staff as a teaching pastor. And there was just a huge thing about power in that system. And they ended up hiring we wanted to do shared leadership there, and they hired a pastor to really keep perpetuating a hierarchical model. And it just was clear that it was not going to work for us to stay there. And so we both exited kind of outwardly in a nice way and inwardly in a horrible way. Yeah. Okay. Super hurt, super betrayed. It was really painful. But it did birth the dream. And so Carl Wheeler is a huge part. He was the teaching pastor and then the co-pastor at the refuge, the one that said, let's do this dream, Kathy, and let's co-pastor together. And as a female in evangelical systems, I mean, I didn't even know what a co-pastor was. And so we started that way in trying to say, what could the dream be? And Carl was a dreamer. I was always a dreamer. I was able to do some of the things that I love to do in that big church related to healing community and in the guts of kind of real life and vulnerability and creating healing spaces. I was doing that long before I was on that church staff, just in my own way, pushing against fake in churches and trying to have it be like our real stories, and healing community that way. And so we were a really good team. But it was also really weird because we only knew one way of doing it. And that was in, more traditional structures and kind of bumping up against them. And then you kind of have a blank slate to create what you want to create. And so we did that with the team. We had a little small group of people who were actually at our big community together. I did a lot of things in recovery ministry. And so a lot of people came that were kind of brought that ethos. And then Carl knew some people that had dreams. And then we were kind of a little team that literally left big church, kind of crawling on our knees, but smiling a little bit on the outside. So people really didn't know. And then starting this thing 2 months later, less than 2 months later. So, which is just a terrible idea.
Yeah. Don't do that for future reference.
Don't do that at home.
Give yourself some space to heal.
Yes. And so we really did just try and kind of find something that would work for us, honestly. And a core part was always a place for spiritual doubters, a place for people who are healing and struggling with making it through the day, in recovery, 12-step ethos, and then shared leadership and egalitarianism, where people from all places, that wasn't just about gender, but also across socioeconomic. So different people could lead things and participate in things without kind of bumping up against a hierarchical structure. That's how we started. I mean, we had little dream meetings and people came and kind of said their dreams for church.
That's awesome. And it sounds so neat and tidy, and I'm sure it wasn't messy at all. Just kidding. There's so much mess.
Big, hot, freaking mess. And super fun too, because it was kind of exciting to think about what could be.
Yeah. So you left big church and went to, like, you were in a church building first, and you kind of had this nomadic first, how many years of just kind of bumping around to different places, right?
2 years. And
Okay.
so embedded in the ethos culture, or the ethos of the refuge, and the culture was, we didn't want people to come and be part for the worship, the teaching, or the kids, which
What's the point? No, just joking.
super countercultural. And we met with different people, they knew we were starting something, and we really did form as a church. So that's super important. Like, that is part of how we did it. And so we met with different people, and they would tell us their strategies, just get one person said, get your studs, find your studs. Like, how offensive that is now, keep listening to that. Get them around you, and like, tell them to cut their sails to old things and commit to this. And honestly, from the very beginning, we were like, no, we're not going to do that, because we know what that means for our friends who actually are feeling a part of this from the beginning, that really don't fit into that category of kind of put together typical leaders in a lot of faith structures. And we always had the ragtag misfit. We were always like the land of misfit toys, island of misfit toys from Rudolph. That was always the refuge. And that came from people like me, who was trying to find my way. And it came from really everybody who was there. Like, everyone came with the idea of trying to be part of something that felt more communal. So we were in a church, we used a church's space, and we were there on Sunday nights for some of our dreaming and some of our gatherings. We got kicked out of there because of kind of being rabble rousers and leaving our other church in a hard way. So I was friends with them, but it was sad and kind of painful. It was like another pain.
Yeah.
Then we found some wedding event space. We had 2 different spaces, and we were gathering mainly on Sunday nights, because weddings aren't on Sunday nights.
Yes.
And we really did some really creative things from the beginning. We always tried to do mixed up ways that people engaged around tables, and the kids were always involved, and we always tried to make the space really pretty. But it did really involve a lot of work.
Yeah.
And in terms of setup and pulling it off together, we were team led. Everybody pitched in. Everybody tried to create these spaces. And we actually never had a budget. We didn't have money. Nobody got paid. And then we had to pay our rent. And so we had to find ways to pay for just once a week in some of these spaces. But we also did a lot of little special events and different things that are still part of the refuge community, like Lake Day came from 2006, from the very beginning. We did a trunk or treat thing inside our very first year in the space that we were using. We did eating, like feasts. And we would have like dinner be part of our night, not all the time then, but it was like part of trying to like really join in around tables.
So being in kind of these wedding venue spaces probably cultivated a lot of like imagination for like what could be possible when we had a flexible space. Like, we could use tables and sit around in circles rather than in lines. And
Totally. And because the spaces were really like big open rooms. And then we did beauty night. Like, we started our very first art night at one of them, because it was like perfect space for that kind of an event. It had a place to put food, and it had a garden outside that people could walk around in. And, all of those places really were interesting in their own way, but they were also really hard because we had to do so much setup and tear down and cleaning. And so, that part, while it was fun, it was also really hard.
yes. Well, yeah, and sharing the space with other people and coming in and it not maybe being the way you were hoping.
Oh, no, I cleaned so many dirty bathrooms in that second space. It was gross.
That good thing you're not cleaning bathrooms still, huh?
Yeah, that's the joke of the story. I just cleaned the refuge bathroom the other day, and I did say, oh my gosh, I've been cleaning bathrooms for 16 years.
Like being a parent of a 16-year-old. All right. Well, that's Awesome. So you had this kind of bebop in the church, then 2 different wedding event centers. And then I came to the Refuge for the first time. I kind of as a visitor and kind of encountering the community at this next space that you were at called the Grange. And then that's in Broomfield, right?
It's in Broomfield.
Yeah, the Broomfield Grange. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that space, but I can just tell you the physical aspects of the space is that it is this old Grange hall that they redid, I guess, after they moved in, because I came about 3 years into you being there, or 4 years, I think. But it's across some railroad tracks in this dark street with a silo and like no lights and a gravel parking lot. So when the first event I came to, I like drove in and I was like, am I gonna get murdered? Am I in the right place? But then walking in and like this bright room with like friendly people, and I think the best description is like, I just remember it was beautiful and awkward, which is pretty much the description of most everything we do. And that was my first encounter with a Refuge event.
And that totally is, it was always that way, even before then, even when we had prettier spaces, like everything was kind of awkward. And the Grange was really a gift to us. We were in that space for 5 years.
Wow.
And it was closed, and we had some really persistent people that just wanted to see if we could make it happen, because that building was only getting used by a little teeny 15-member church once a week for 2 hours. And the rest of the time, it really was completely closed. And so we negotiated opening it and using it part-time for our weekend gathering. We started a community garden there. And it really was really a special season because we kind of had a space. It wasn't ours, because in our ethos was actually, we were anti-building. And because we didn't want worship kids or teaching be a draw for people. Yeah. And then we wanted the people, like our primary thing would be in community together, and that community can happen in all these different ways and places that have nothing to do with the facility. But we were really happy actually to have a gathering space that had a lot of flexibility. And we chopped up, there were benches, we chopped them up and made them smaller, refinished them, we painted it, we made it pretty. And we used it really for our weekend gathering, which moved to Saturday nights. And that was when we started eating every week too. And we had somebody that said, we should eat beforehand, the Johnsons. Yeah. And they would go downstairs and make soup.
I remember the soup. I remember going down those stairs. Yeah.
Soup and bread. We popped up a little table for personal care items. And, there are basic needs that people had in our community, because we always had people who were not financially resourced from the very beginning. Lots of single moms, lots of people navigating the realities of mental illness, physical disabilities, and then tons of people who were also just kind of all over in terms of faith, for different reasons, just kind of found themselves on the outs of systems, which was really similar to some of us in leadership. And so it just was this ragtag group always. And at the Grange, what was fun about it is that we had a little bit of anchoring, even though we cleaned up every time. We sort of had a quote unquote home. And that was a really sweet season. And it was also really hard, because one of the things that was really core that revealed itself really pretty early on, but certainly during those 5 years, was some of our theological differences that we always held, but they kind of came to the surface as we grew.
Yeah.
Because so many. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, that's why I first came to the Refuge was I was part of the Faith and Justice Conference, and you were part of that too. And I'm trying to remember the timeline, but it was around then. And I remember hearing about these co-pastors who, like, one was evangelical and one was progressive, and they co-pastored the same community. And I was like, I have to see this happening. And so it was something that, like, I thought was really amazing that there was this community that was trying to do this. And so that's kind of why I entered in. And then, as over time, things kind of shifted, but.
Yeah, and we did do that. I mean, that became a thing, and that wasn't how we started. We probably started a little bit more, it felt like, on the same page, and really looking back, it was different, but some of the same ethos and language and those things. And truly, we just like the whole community. This wasn't just us. Like people just evolve. And then what do you do when you change? And then some of the things that were really worth fighting for change, you know, for us personally. And so we really hit that in that season. And the community, we had a guidance group. We were always team led. Like this is a huge part. We didn't actually have really good structures for decision making. And it kind of defaulted to those of us who kind of started it. We had a third co-pastor at that point who was there from the beginning, my friend Mike, and he's still here. And in that whole transition, you know, was basically just like growing up together and trying to navigate differences. And the Refuge was really known for that. And being in the thick of it, I can say it was really beautiful on one level, and it's really hard to do. It's really hard to do. But in that season, what I loved is that some of that sense of you could go to the Refuge for this if you began to emerge in the wider community. We became more involved in Broomfield. You know, we had been in Arvada and then Westminster, then Broomfield. It's all north Denver. People came from all over and still come from all over, but it kind of like gave us a little hub there. And we got involved with the wider Broomfield community through Marty Dormish, who is now our cafe founder and co-director. And, you know, there was just this thing of like a little more sense of place. And but so we had a building and it was hard to kind of keep there, but it wasn't our building. Like we just used the building and it cost us $400 a month.
Oh, those were the days.
Yeah, because when the wedding event centers cost like $400 and $500 and $600 a week, maybe even more.
That's a big shift. And then in 2013, there was a big flood, which some y'all might probably remember here, and that kind of forced a shift. Like you'd kind of been dreaming for a different space for a little bit, but that kind of forced a shift to a new spot.
Yeah, because really I'll say this, all along I looked at space and we explored different spaces and we just could never make the math work. It just never worked. And we were trying, and we also did not want to get in a situation where we were beholden to a lease. We were at a place where, I mean, people couldn't even go eat because there were stairs and we had too many kids in a dark, gross basement in the Grange. And it just wasn't right. We didn't quite know what to do about it because we didn't have very much money. And so the floods actually forced us to make a decision. And there were some things that the Grange leadership, some of that had changed. We started that and it kind of evolved. And so I went back to a building in Broomfield that I had seen for a long time. It was an old Woolrich's. I had driven there and parked there for 2 years before then, dreaming about it, honestly. And this time it's like there was a little bit like, we have to do something. And we had explored some other churches, different things that just like nothing worked. And we walked in and we're like, this could work. And so we dreamt as a community, what could we pull off? And people walked through the facility. It was like needed a lot of work, but we could kind of see it because it had good bones and a great location, kind of on the other side of the track, still in Broomfield. We're in the not great part of town, which is exactly who the Refuge has always been. And so that was how we ended up discerning that if we could raise the rent there was a little over $4,000. So that was a 10 times increase. This is a big stretch for us philosophically and financially.
Yeah.
And we said, if we can raise all of it in 30 days, we're going to do it and sign a 1-year lease, renewable, so we could get out of it at any time. And we had the little mission that should, which was this little fun golden book that we created that told our story of just really being this group of people where you could enter in no matter where you were and find kindred spirits. And that really was, and you could just do anything creative. Like we just did so many creative expressions of gatherings and special events and all those things. That was always in us. And so the Little Mission That Should kind of talked about that a little bit more. And that was when it was clear that we really were a mission. And that language was hard for us on one level, but it was really positive for us because it helped people understand that we were a place that was meeting needs that some other communities weren't.
Yeah.
And that people could really find a place and resources and support and help for really hard times in their story. And we raised it in 30 days, up to the wire. I mean, it was to the wire, but we did it. And then we did a community project to move into that space in 2013. And it was really fun season and really hard too, because we never really had that responsibility, but it did begin to open up what could be in the community. We were already pretty established in some Broomfield connections, but it really, the dream that Marty had, he was on our guidance group and our ministry team, and he really had a dream of an open space where people could come and just hang out and get free lunch in the community. And so we started with open space in 2013, which is when we got our facility. And we always we got donated cafe chairs, we had donated couches, and it does feel like a refuge, like home, like a home when you walk in. And it was, I think the whole refuge is like 7,000 square feet or something, at least the main area is. So it's like this big, like homey living room that you could set up tables and do different things with. You could leave things and not have to break it down. And the open space opened up and evolved into the Refuge Cafe, which has really become a cornerstone effort now. And that kind of just was the beginning of, what is it if we're really rooted in the neighborhood? And what does that look like?
Yeah, and I've really seen that just take off since we've found that space of just, besides people walking in and saying, are you the, well, at first it was, are you the Habitat Restore? Because that used to be above.
I'll get that.
Still get that. And then now there's a thrift store above us. And so it's like, are you Joyful Journeys? But folks who stumble on us, who are trying to stumble on us, just being a part of the wider Broomfield community and people knowing what the refuge is, in the sense of like, this is a safe place for all sorts of folks. And it's been really a huge gift to have that space. And that's kind of when I entered into more official as we get at the refuge, is Kathy invited me to come and help with music on Sundays. And so I came and started to do that and got involved in other ways over the years. But yeah, it's a really, it's not about the building, but it is a really beautiful space that we're all grateful for and has so many different functions.
It really does. And, you know, I shifted. I mean, I'm all for, if we didn't have that building, I'll say this, I say this out all the time. If we didn't have the building, we would find a way at this stage. We would have found a way at that stage. But I will say it would be so much harder. And that people, you know, our house, for example, we live in Arvada, Jose and I do. And, you know, we've always just had refuge things there. We have our House of Refuge started in 2006 and it still meets. We just did our white elephant. New people come and it's been on Wednesday night during the school year since then. And so that is like a hub, but it's only accessible to certain people that can drive here, that, you know, that have resources to get here, that are interested in that kind of a thing. And when we got our facility, it just opened up this anchoring place. And then we did get more involved in the Broomfield community. And over time, like as we had those open hours, more people sent folks our way. And so that kept opening up possibility. We got some pastoral interns, they could staff things and, you know, learn and teach things. That's how we expanded into more nature healing kinds of things through one of our interns who actually interned with us from DC and then moved back to DC and then moved back here to be part. You know, there are so many ways that people connected. But I think what was really significant for us is that we just kept kind of evolving in our leadership structures, in our conversations, who was there. And so the season in the Grange that had a lot of like holding the differences of progressive and evangelical in leadership and in a community together was like at the top of the list. in so many ways of things that we did. When we moved into the building, things began to shift a little bit in becoming this mission center, and where people could come and get practical needs met and spiritual needs met, for if you were really had a big faith deconstruction and how to find your way through. And in 2016, we hit our 10-year mark. And that was big, and it caused us to do some really important wrestling together. And one of the founding pastors transitioned out during that season. Holding that space of differences was really hard. And especially when, you kind of started one way and then evolved into something different. And that transition forced us to form a team. We always did things in teams, and that was probably like in its purest sense, like whoever wants to be part of this dreaming for the next 10 years transition team can be part. You just have to commit to meetings and the long haul of making it through. We had 14 people come and do that, and that was a really big thing because we did a lot of listening and learning from the community, and that's where we really got. You were part of that. You were part of that, of just really seeing what it would be to distill down to what are our shared values instead of shared beliefs. And then what are some of our leadership structures that are more sustainable and more healthy? And you have a little bit clearer who makes what decisions, and you have more people making those decisions instead of just a couple.
When I got to come in at the end of that process, and the fun part, y'all had like a year of slogging through really hard conversations, coming to some, and then I came in and said, okay, now what are we going to do with all of this? And the fun part. So thanks for letting me kind of.
You helped us though, because you helped us with consensus decision making, and that really helped us because we didn't really have that clearly defined. And so, or who was responsible for that consensus. And so we formed our 3 teams that we have now, which is a serve and sustain team. And so it's 7 people making decisions that are big picture decisions together. And I love that. And that anybody, there's always, you can serve on that if you want to, but here's some dates that you have to. And then we have a community life team that has all aspects of Refuge Community Life. And that formed, in 2017 and all the way. And in 5 years, what's happened with that. And then we have an advisory team now. And that was really helpful to have this group of people that don't come regularly, but can offer wisdom. Mm-hmm. And so that, just like that evolution, so many things evolved in our wider work too.
Well, and I think that's like what happens in a lot of ways in our lives, is that we often, it's really clear what we don't want, but it's harder to figure out what we want. Yeah. And I think thinking about the beginning of the Refuge story, it's like there were some things that you knew you wanted, but it was mostly like, we don't want this. We don't want a system where people aren't welcome. We don't want a space where, certain voices don't matter. We don't want this power garbage. We don't want this. And so then figuring that out is important. And then stumbling into over time, like, this is really who we are. This is really what we want. And these are the rhythms that we want to help guide who we become. And I think those things still are guiding us into all these different branches. And the Refuge has so many different branches. And we have our community life team meeting once every quarter.
Yeah.
And that's like all the different pieces of the Refuge. And we just had it about a month ago. And it was just so beautiful. I don't know if I want to talk about but there are just so many things we're doing. Like we were writing all the different like branches of the Refuge and it was just like the whiteboard was full and overflowing. And I think that's just a testament to like that deep rootedness of just persevering over years and years, and like the fruit that's coming now of like, we've got Single Moms Unite, we have Refuge Reads, we have the cafe, we have House of Refuge. That's like 4 out of like how many 25 things that are happening in our community on a weekly or monthly basis. And yeah.
And it's what's so beautiful is like really that shift in 20 the 16 to 17 transition of really becoming a community that gathered around shared values. And those shared values of, I always say them, they're important to say, of presence and of engagement, transformation, and welcome, and creativity and celebration. That when that shifted, like, it really did open up. And at that community life team meeting, that felt so holy to me, because new people said, this helps me so much, because I only see the Refuge Cafe, or I only see Refuge Reads, or I only see these different parts. The Refuge Rainbow, joining in on the Refuge Community Live, which is queer, social, and support, and really for all the letters of the alphabet. And that beautiful thing that happens when new people come and bring things that they're meant to bring, and then have a space at the table to live those things out. So when I look at Refuge Community Life now, like the long list, a few of those things were at the very beginning, and they were really early on. We had recovery, and we had advocates pretty early on, but really most everything just kept coming as new people came and said that this is what they're called to do. I wanted to, and have a space to do, because actually a lot of people have wanted to do some of these things before and just didn't have a place for different reasons, because of hierarchical systems that just didn't allow enough permeable and fluid movement in. And so everything has been an experiment, and that piece has been really fun to see it evolve. And then I am now, like, the building has become really special, but we're not beholden to that building. We actually are beholden to the things that happen within the facility, and a lot happens not in that facility. And so, but what we are beholden to is to living this out together.
Yeah, and I think that explains well our kind of most recent shift a year ago in language around us being a hub. And really, that's what the Refuge is. It's a hub for healing community, social action, and creative collaboration. That's the first time I've done that.
Nice work.
How many times a week do you say that?
So many.
So many times. But yeah, this idea that we are a hub. And so there's all these different aspects of our community that are hubbed out of this core. And it's not the building. It's this core group of people that say yes to each other, to community, to life, and to dreaming for something better in the world.
Yes. And, just one thing I want to add about that, we were started as a church, then we were a mission center and Christian community when we moved into the facility. And then we did that redream, and we put Christian community and mission center for Christian community, and then mission center. And then we found we were having to explain it all the time. We were having to say, well, here's what we mean by this, and there's a room for all. And then mission center, so many hard things emerged in the world, more about hard things that had happened in the name of Jesus that we didn't want to have to explain. And so, but they worked for those seasons. And almost everything for different reasons worked for the seasons, but we were always and continue to be willing to go. If it doesn't, but together, not one or two people, but together, let's try and make a shift. And when we made this decision to change into the Hub for Healing Community, transition in, our services day teams kind of processed it first. And then we went to the community life team and got input and helped flesh it out. And then we ran it by our advisory team. And that part feels so good and so healthy. And it's always so messy and so slow. And it's a lot of different people to hear voices from, but it's totally worth it.
Woo, there we go. The long view. That was good.
Yeah, with so many details that are missed out. And I just want to say this, Be a Refuge is about fleshing out some of those things over time. And we're going to dive in and hear from different people other than just Joe and I. And so, just know that we know there's so many gaps. But that's part of laying some tracks, and hopefully that gives you a little bit of sense of the wild and eclectic. So we end every episode with just like something that you're going to take with you from this conversation. So just real quick, something that's going to linger from what we talked about today.
I'm just excited that I got the tagline right. I'm not gonna lie.
You should be. It's hard when you're not used to saying it. I do
Yeah.
tours all the time, so I'm used to it.
How about
I
for
think
you?
for me, I think it's just the resilience of the refuge. Yeah. The resilience and the commitment to continue to evolve. And I'm grateful for that.
Awesome. Well, we'll see you next time.
All right. Be a refuge.
Be a refuge.